So yeah, welcome back. Week 2 we're on now. Um, okay, what do you guys think? Easy material so far? Yes, for the most part. Yeah, that first section is a bad one to begin on because I know y'all left last time saying this is horrible, and I kind of tried to make sure y'all were aware of. I agree that stuff is pretty horrible because it's just rules and code and there's no way to spice that up very much. It just kind of is what it is. But now you kind of get into, and it's better and more exciting than this when you actually start talking about actual audit work. We're still kind of figuring out rules. We're still in the code, but it just, I don't know, it's a little more interesting. This week's all about independence. And let me point something out to you that might be a helpful resource. Um, so it's easy just to Google it. It's AICPA, plain English, and then it just kind of starts popping up. But it's the AICPA Plain English Guide to Independence. It's so great. So it's a little 55-page document all about independence. And I find myself kind of control F in my way, control F in my way through this. It sounds kind of obscene, doesn't it? If I want to see a different spin on something we're talking about. So some of these oddball things, I'm like, all right, let me get a little more on that. I'll go to this, and it's set up in a very user-friendly way, in kind of a question and answer format. Do I need to remain independent from just my test client or from other entities as well? Um, which business relationships within a test client compare independence? So it's set up real nice and neat. And you'll see much of the same stuff that you saw in the text, but put forth in a little more friendly way. Here's the deal about family members right here and other relatives. If you actually, you click on the table of contents and get down there. So here's a little snippet about relatives. When is my family subject to the rules? So it talks about all of that, spouse or equivalent, all of that's there in nice little format. So I just wanted to point that out so you would be aware that it exists and can be a pretty helpful little resource. Okay. But as for us, we've got our Wiley text. So we'll start with really what was the last page from our week 1 thing. I have my week 2 notes posted in Canvas now. Hit the publish button on those. And I also have the questions posted if you want a Word document format of all the questions. I have the correct answer highlighted in green on that. So mutual funds and retirement plans. So a lot of very specific areas that we look at, all regarding independence, is set up pretty nice and neat. Doesn't get too overly confusing. Sometimes they may not give you quite the information that you want. Sometimes it might be a little too succinct, but that's okay. That's when we can kind of do a little exploring for ourselves. Okay, so we are talking about independence with all of this stuff. And we are talking about independence issues here regarding mutual funds. So this first line item up here is us actually auditing a mutual fund. The mutual fund itself is our client. So if you own shares in a mutual fund, you have a direct financial interest in it. So that would be an independence problem if you were auditing that mutual fund. That mutual fund wasn't a test fund. This second line item has to do with auditing companies that are held in the mutual fund. So that is the indirect financial interest. So if client is one of the firms that has stock that's held by a mutual fund. What's the deal there? So if you own 5% or less of the outstanding shares, diversified, they get very specific with the rules on this. For the diversified mutual fund, the interest in the underlying investments is indirect, and that 5% or less makes it immaterial and indirect. So independence is not impaired here. To add a little to that, if the mutual fund is not diversified, or if you own more than 5% of that fund's equity, you're still indirect with the investment. But at this point, you would need to consider whether your ownership is material to your net worth. And there's a good problem from a chapter that makes you do some number crunching on that kind of drives that point home a little bit more, which we'll look at in a couple of seconds. So just a couple of tidbits about mutual funds there. Then they shift gears into all these other types of plans, retirement savings, that kind of thing. So fuel facts along the way in these sections. So if you, and it gets a little redundant. I'm saying to myself to say if you or an immediate family member, because we have a rule that just equates immediate family members to us that we'll talk about later. So I guess I kind of overdo it saying immediate family members. If you self-direct investments into a plan or have the ability to participate in investment decisions, then there's a direct independence. Direct means who cares about materiality, you're done, right? And I know that y'all probably picked up along the way that that's really just a general thing that you need to know, and that'll kind of get you through most of these, this scenario, that scenario, that scenario. If you're participating, directing things, doing some oversight role, you're in it. And independence, that's the word, all words is kind of impaired there. So you see this over and over again this week about being able to direct investments into it, being able to participate in decisions, being able to do that. That puts you kind of in trouble on independence. All right. If you do not self-direct or participate, then there's an indirect. So, saying it again, really. So, you do not self-direct or participate. Independence unless it's material. So, have to kind of look at materiality issues. And then shares held in employee stock option plan are indirect interest unless you have the ability to make decisions and things. The right to that's about it for that section for me. Questions? Let's look at the first two. So number one, which of the following cases would a covered member not have an independence problem? So three of these are bad, one of them is good. We're looking for the good one. All right, so A says Paula owns 52 of 10,000 outstanding shares. So we're looking at immaterial here, probably, of a mutual fund. A mutual fund, which is an audit client of Paula's firm. Paula is on the audit team. So that's a problem, right? That is a direct interest in the mutual fund. That is an audit client. Doesn't matter if it's material or immaterial. You can't audit. B is even worse, I guess, because it's the same deal. But now it's a much more material ownership of the fund itself. So A and B doesn't matter who it works. C, we got Debo owns 40%, a pretty good chunk there, of the outstanding shares of ABC mutual fund. ABC is a diversified mutual fund and holds shares of XYZ Corporation. We are on the attest firm's audit team for that XYZ Corporation. That's some stock. All right, so they're kind of leading us in the right direction on this, giving that 40% number on there, big 40% number, so we question materiality. They would need on a CPA exam question to be a little more specific, argue that that's not material, total net worth. But we know where they're trying to lead us on, so we'll go with it. So we're auditing a client that has stock in fund, we have indirect interest here that is material according to this 50%. So there's a problem. Which means D is fine. We got the little immaterial, supposedly 4% number, diversified mutual fund, indirect, immaterial, fine. But 2, this is the one that kind of drives that home about judging materiality. Just to kind of put some numbers to it. So we got a fund, a non-diversified mutual fund, so that automatically clicks in our head. All right, we're gonna have to make a materiality. Non-diversified mutual fund, they own shares in a few companies, including Brokerage Corporation. Tully is an auditor working for the big old accounting firm. And Tully is a covered member regarding big old audit client. Tully is invested in funds. Assume that funds total assets of $25 million. Tully owns 2% of the fund's outstanding shares. And the fund itself has 10% of its assets invested in people. What value are we talking? We have to put a number to this, so we can start judging materiality. So it is simply the 25 million times 2%. So our shares, Tully, so we are, our shares in the mutual fund are worth 2% of that, $500,000. And the amalgamated portion of that is 10%, so 50 grand. Okay, am I coming through loud enough on everybody's comment that one is not able to hear me very well? You can't hear well either. Oh. All right. Mystery solved. Okay. So yeah, so back to number 2 here. So again, we have a 2% share of this 25 million, which is, yeah, y'all know math. 2% of 25 million is 500,000. So that is our value of ownership in the mutual fund. And the mutual fund has 10% of its assets with one of our audit clients. All right. So to put a number value on how much my investment really is with the audit client, I have about $50,000 at stake, 10% of that 500,000. So then I would make a materiality judgment on what that is compared to my net worth to see, is that a material number or not? There you go. One of the rare cases where we have to do calculations in this audit class. But it's more of a conceptual idea, really. Threshold. Yeah, so that's the tricky part. What's material and what's not, it's a judgment call. Now we'll have a chapter where we talk about materiality, and we'll have a process that we might use to kind of set boundaries for where, we kind of just a really systematic way that we can use to judge materiality. But no, it's a judgment call. There's no rules about this is material, this is not. Now they'll throw little rules in there like this 5% thing, where it's just like, hey, 5%, you're good, that kind of thing. But no, materiality is pretty much a judgment call that you'll never be asked to make on an exam. Can't ask you that. All right, well, that wraps up our stuff from our week 1 materials that we saved for this time. So now our week 2 stuff. So we're talking independence here. So just to recap, we need to be independent if we're so-called covered member, both in fact and in appearance. We want to definitely be independent, and we want to appear independent. So that means we don't want to take part in anything that someone might just misunderstand. That we're not serving the right purpose if they're perceiving us to be not independent, and we actually are. So independence is required for attest engagements like audits and reviews and things like that. It's not required for non-attest service like tax prep and financial planning and consulting and stuff like that, if those are the only services that we provide to the client. So covered members is a thing we talked about last time. So if you remember, those are the ones who are subject to these independence things we're talking about. Pretty much the obvious people are covered members: the engagement team, team members, the firm itself, partners and managers that have a relationship with the client, non-attest relationship, so no partners. And then simply partners that work in the same office as the audit team. So engagement team, someone in position to influence the engagement, a 10-hour person, we called it last time. So that's a partner or a manager who provides 10 or more hours of non-attest services to the client. Partner in the same office where the audit team is anchored, and some oddball things like the firm's employee benefit plans, that kind of thing. So firm's benefit plan cannot invest in an audit client is basically what that means. Getting a little too much with that though. So really our last thing we talked about last time was financial interests, and we kind of picked up on that earlier at the beginning of today. So independence problem, if there's a direct financial interest in a client, period, right? Materiality doesn't matter. And in a nutshell, direct means owning or controlling. And then there's an independence problem if it is a indirect and material financial interest in a client. You're fine if it's indirect and immaterial. So that's pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot to keep straight there. So we're doing more of the same like we just did with the mutual funds chapter. We're just looking at certain potential independence issues and what the rules are. So here we go. This section is partnerships, section 529 plans, trusts, estates, employee benefit plans. So they just kind of crammed all those into one little chapter because each of those would be too short for their own chapter. All right. Here we go. Partnerships and LLCs. Most of this is really just giving us more of an idea of what's direct, what's indirect financial relationships. Looking at the questions to see which one of these are any good. sometimes, y'all may not be the same way, but sometimes I have to kind of stop and remind myself in words, what exactly are we talking about here? And the questions kind of help with that. It puts kind of words to what's otherwise just kind of in outline form. Gives you more complete thought. So, what we're looking at with these first little sections here with partnerships and LLCs, you might have an LLC or something that owns stock in an audit client, and you are somehow related to that LLC, or you have a partnership that has ownership in an audit client, and you are a general partner with that partnership or a limited partner. So I always have to kind of step back and remind myself, okay, what exactly is the situation here? Y'all may be different, but I always have to kind of revisit that. All right, so a general partner has a direct financial interest. A limited partner has an indirect financial interest. And here's true for most everything, unless they have the authority to do stuff, right? To supervise and participate. Then they're in there doing stuff. So, limited partners are often called silent partners. They invest and really can only stand to lose what they invest, and they have an investment. And general partners, on the other hand, have money invested, and they're sitting there managing the day-to-day and actually participating in decisions. And so obviously they would have a direct financial interest in those things, and a limited partner would have indirect, unless they're in there doing stuff, right? And then the LLC, again, same type deal. It just depends on the extent of involvement in management. So quick little tidbits there. Section 529 plan, you read something like that and you think, will they really ask me a question about this? And my answer is, I don't know. It doesn't take that long to commit it to memory, just in case. Would they give you a multiple choice question on this? Maybe so. It's not that far out there, but it's a little out there, right? This isn't walking around knowledge. So you got two different plans here, a prepaid tuition plan and a savings plan. So to know anything about what is involved here means you really need to know what these things are. So a 529 plan is a qualified tuition plan, is what it's legally known as. So Section 529 is the Internal Revenue Code section that authorizes it. It's a savings plan that kind of gives you tax advantages, and it's an encouragement to save for future education costs. So there's two types, and here are the two types right here: prepaid tuition plans and savings plans. Usually you got parents and grandparents establishing these for kids and grandkids who will be the beneficiary of it. So with this first one, the prepaid tuition plan, this gives you the ability to lock in tuition at current rates, and you're paying, future tuition in terms of today's rates. There's no investment options. The programs are pooling all this money together and making investments on their own so they can earn a return and meet, or hopefully even exceed, these tuition increases on down the road. So that's what a prepaid tuition plan is. Savings plan is where the account holder contributes money, and funds are typically invested in things like mutual funds, and you can choose the funds you want to invest in, and how well those funds perform will determine how the account grows. So that's kind of the basic difference in those. So in a prepaid tuition plan, the owner of the account has a direct interest in the plan, obviously, but only an indirect interest in the underlying investments, because they're not in there making decisions and directing those investments anywhere. All that money that goes into that plan is pooled together, and the plan's doing its thing. You're not influencing it. So direct interest in the plan, but only an indirect interest in the underlying investments. Savings plan, though, they can decide what to invest in, they can make all these decisions. So you got a direct interest in the plan and a direct interest in its investments. So there it is. Like I said, I don't know how super important it is. I do know I must have spelled independence wrong here. Without the N. There we go. Okay, so that's those. Trusts and estates. So I guess we probably know what trusts are, and I don't know if we could sit there and explain to somebody exactly what it is, but we kind of know it when we see it. But it's a way to direct assets where they need to go long after the owner, the original asset's owner's death. It's a legal entity, the trust is, and it holds whatever the property is. And you have a trustor who gives the money or the assets or whatever. You have a trustee, and that's the entity that's holding it. And then you have a beneficiary that receives. So that's the main players here. So if you're the trustee, that's the entity holding the assets. If you're a trustee or of a trust, or the executor of a state, and we got estates in here too, you're generally fine independence-wise, unless, there it is again, unless you have the ability to make decisions, and there's trouble. Independence is fine unless the trust or state owns more than 10% of one of your clients' ownership interests. So they kind of put I guess you could call it a materiality number, so I was kind of like I was saying earlier, sometimes there's little rules in there about 10%, you get above that, it's a problem. That's an example of that. And there's an independence problem if the value of the trust or state's ownership interest in a client exceeds 10% of its total assets. So I guess we kind of put that in a nutshell, and it's like the other things, independence is fine unless you have the ability to start making decisions, and you're fine on independence unless it starts getting over the materiality level. Same idea as the other things we've done, right? If you are the grantor, that's the person setting up the trust. That's the person we called it trustor earlier, same thing. That's the person whose assets are going into the trust for someone else. So if you're that person, the investments are a direct financial interest if you have the ability to participate in the trust decisions. So there that is again. If you're the beneficiary of a trust, then your interest is obviously direct in the trust, indirect in the underlying investments, again, unless you participate. And this is a little out there, but a blind trust is a little special deal set up to avoid conflicts of interest. But blind trusts and the underlying investments are direct to the grantor, since the investments will ultimately revert back. I don't know. Let's just get rid of that. That's too much. We don't need to cloud our head with too much stuff. Get rid of that one. That's a little out there. And I actually looked at the plain English text to see if they said anything about blind trust, and they didn't. So it may not be that important. I meant to delete it earlier. All right, so tidbits on trust and estates, but again, we can kind of put it in a nutshell like the other stuff. We'll get to the point, hopefully, where when we see questions, we kind of logically know what is and isn't the answer. Just because we kind of see the pattern that's forming. Participation in employment benefit plans. So there's an independence problem if you participate in an employment benefit plan that is actually in a test client. Seems obvious, right? And then there's a few exceptions that probably a little too much, but there they are. Okay, So that's that section. Looking at the questions. Let me see this out. Clicking on it. There we go. So number one, I think is good to look at, just to put more words with some of the stuff we've been trying to talk about. So one says, which of the following relationships creates an investment in ABC company that's indirect rather than direct? So that's why I like the questions. All right, now we got a scenario and we're like, okay, which of these makes it a problem for us to have a potential problem for us to have an investment in ABC company? So in our first situation in A, it says Mr. Song is a general partner of LOT partnership. All right. We are Mr. Song, I guess. One of our partners, without us knowing, invests some partnership money by buying ABC company shares. All right. They kind of have throw that without us knowing. You know, without us knowing, it's not going to change this. Bottom line with A is we are a general partner of a partnership, and the partnership has interest in this company, and that makes that interest a direct interest of ours because we're a general partner. B, we are Miss Ramos on this one, or Ramos. Here we are a limited partner. Okay, so our head starts thinking about that. Limited partner, we may be okay, of this partnership. When we signed up for the agreement, we demanded and was allocated the authority. Now we're thinking, uh-oh, we've got authority to do stuff here. That's going to cause problems, right? We have the authority to replace the general partner, Dingle. And that partner has invested some partnership money into ABC. All right, so we're a partner in a partnership. That partnership has a financial interest in ABC. We're calling ourselves a limited partner, but we have some decision-making power here regarding the general partner and therefore the partnership operations. So this is a direct interest since we have power here. We're not super limited in our limited partnership role. So no on B. C says TIP, so I guess we're TIP on this one, is a member of CLL LLC. All right, that LLC is managed by an agent rather than the members who own it, right? So we have agents managing it, which means we're not. We, the owners, are not. Unbeknownst to us, the agent who runs CLL has invested some cash buying ABC. All right. It'd be nice to know how material this is, but it's agent managed, which means we're not making decisions. So we have an indirect financial interest here. And the question is indirect rather than direct. They're not asking us to consider material interest or anything. It's just this is indirect. That's all they're wanting to know. So C is the answer to this one. B has Joe being a member of an LLC, which is member managed, which means Joe is managing the thing, which means we can stop reading because we're making decisions. And any investment that LLC makes is direct to us. It's a good little question set up there for those, just to put stories with scenarios and help us kind of drive some of these points home and understand and visualize what's actually happening a little better than the little outline text does, right? So yeah, I like going through the questions. It's a lot more helpful. Yeah, I think the others were pretty straightforward, so we'll move along. Questions or comments on anything? Okay. depository accounts, brokerage accounts, and insurance policies. So 3 in 1 on this section. A firm, an audit firm, can have accounts at a bank that is an attest client. That's fine. I mean, that's little. That's not much of anything. You know, ordinary course of business stuff is usually just fine. So we can have an account at a bank that is an audit client. The firm itself can. Individuals can have a bank account as well at the attest client. And they add a little more to this, as long as the account is insured, which, you know, banks typically are. Or if an immaterial amount is uninsured. So, you know, I think if you're the bank person, what, 100,000 is insured, right? That's on deposit. Is that 150 now? 250 now. Didn't it used to be 100? That's what I always remembered it. But I was looking at you thinking you would tell me if it has changed since I heard you. So, yeah. So, you know, you get a really big uninsured amount there. Then you've kind of got some incentive to make sure that bank stays afloat. And, you know, you got problems there, right? But yeah, ordinary course of business stuff is fine. Collateralized car loans, credit card balances, cash advances. They do add that as long as these things are below $10,000. So they don't want it to get too material. So pretty straightforward stuff here. Things we can easily understand. Brokerage accounts, so account used to buy and sell stocks, bonds, etc. These types of accounts kind of give you access to the stock market. So you can have a brokerage account at an attest client as long as the assets subject to the risk of loss are immaterial to your net worth, and that's again a judgment call. Insurance policies. An insurance policy is not a financial interest unless it offers an investment option. If you had a multiple choice question, they would have to give you that scenario, and as soon as you saw an investment option, it would click in your head, there's a problem. So there's not a lot to memorize here. But there it is, just for the sake of completeness. And I thought all of the questions in this section were really straightforward. But I thought they're really good, just like the others. It puts scenarios together and drives some of the points home in different ways. So the more of these you look at, the better, always. It's good to practice working your way through their difficult wording sometimes. And stuff. But no, I thought all these were extremely straightforward. So unless anybody wanted to look at any of them particularly, we'll keep moving. No one made a note about any of those on their spreadsheet. We can always cover anything anybody wants to cover. Just speak up and we'll do it. All right, we'll keep moving. Loans, leases, and business relationships. All right, so you can't borrow money from or lend money to an attest client. And you can't borrow money from or lend money to officers of an attest client, directors of an attest client, or 10% owners of an attest client. And then we repeat again that lending institutions that are attest clients are an exception. That kind of puts us back at the things we were saying in the previous section. Ordinary course of business stuff is fine. Leases can impair independence. What we used to call capital leases, leases to own, that type of thing, that creates a problem. Operating type arrangement leases where you're just kind of paying essentially rent is fine. And then these questions were kind of fun, the business relationships. Cooperative ventures with an attest client, that creates problems. You know, it's kind of the wording we'll use here. It's problematic, but you can apply safeguards. Joint investments are problematic. an exception is you can both own stock in Walmart. You know, obviously that's not going to create a problem, right? These extremely large, widely held corporations, that's not what we're talking about here. That's not an issue to consider. But, you know, you wouldn't, well, let's look at some of these problems because pretty good. Number one here. So Morgan is a partner at a firm. Let's call ourselves Morgan. We have an audit client, Diesel Corporation. And that corporation is actually 100% owned by a parent company, Dillbilly. Names kill me. We must be concerned about independence. Which of the following situations would not create an independence problem for us regarding either Dillbilly or Diesel? So if we and Dillbilly both own shares of Google, obviously that's not a problem. You know, that's not going to be something that affects any kind of relationship. Like, oh, you got Google, I do too. That's not a close relationship there. But what if, oh, and that's the answer, by the way, because they said which of the following situations would not create an independence problem. So that's your answer. So that means these others are a problem. So if we both own 40% of a small manufacturing company in town, we're in pretty tight relationship together, right? So that would be an independence problem because we are really close with this person, financially speaking, yet that person's our audit client. It's obviously a problem, right? Same with C, and they're getting a little oddball with some of their stuff, but we both love to ski and co-own a ski chalet. Okay, that again indicates this real tight relationship that we have. Same with D. So these are significant investments that we are involved in. So very close relationship. These others are pretty obvious and straightforward, though. We can keep moving unless there's questions or comments. These sections go pretty quick. That's good. It may slow down a little when you get to this family relationship stuff, but it's frustrating to read some of this, but it's not as hard as it seems at the beginning. Once you get the hang of it, this is actually fairly easy. So what we need to do is define and remember the definitions of who is an immediate family member, who is a close relative. Those are CPA questions. You know, those are nice and easy ones. Again, all CPA questions are not hard, so you may get little easy ones like this. So immediate family members, essentially your spouse or spousal equivalent, as they call it, and dependents. Now, the dependent, you know, we tend to think children at that point, right? But that's not necessarily a dependent. You know, a dependent doesn't even have to be related. It's just a dependent can be someone you financially support. So keep that in mind. Close relatives on the other, so immediate family members, spouse, and dependents. There's very strict rules. They're essentially the same as you as far as they have to follow the same independence rules as you do for you to be able to audit a client in question, right? Close relatives, the rules relax a little bit, but there's still rules. But a close relative are your parents, your siblings, and children that are not dependents. So those are your close relatives. So that's pretty easy to keep straight. Immediate family members, spouse, dependents. Close relatives, parents, siblings, non-dependent children. So now that we have those defined, what does it even matter? All right, so immediate family members, they are subject to the same rules as you. That makes it easy to answer questions about them. You get a question about an immediate family member, just cross out whoever it is and write you down and then answer the question, because it's the same rule that you yourself have to follow. So there you go. Now, here's a few little tidbits that we can throw in the mix. They may not have a financial interest in attest clients unless it's indirect and immaterial. So there's that. They may not cumulatively own more than 5% of an attest client. They may participate in an employee benefit plan that is an attest client or is sponsored by an attest client with safeguards. See, you get into this, and I'm just thinking, when would I ever see a test question that much detail? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think so. When you start talking employee benefit plans and things like that. So I highlight in green the main takeaways here. Close relative, rules to follow, but not nearly as strict. So really what we need to take note of is with a close relative, parent, sibling, non-dependent children, independence becomes a problem if one of those people has a key position with an attest client. So key position, it'll be obvious whether it's a key position or not that's in question when you see this in a multiple choice question. It's going to be someone with some kind of financial oversight role, CEO, CFO, something like that. So if you've got a parent or a sibling or a non-dependent child that's a CFO of a company you're auditing, you are not independent with that company. Independence becomes a problem regarding a close relative also if that close relative has a financial interest in the attest client that is material. So there you go. So those are the two main things to take note of as far as close relatives go. So there you go. You know, not a whole lot to deal with here. Let's look at someone on the Excel spreadsheet had a question about number 4. Which of the following is not an immediate family member? So an immediate family member, you need to just remember in your head, here's who they are. It's a spouse. So they're a family member. Spousal equivalent's the same deal. And a dependent, no matter what the relationship is. So a non-dependent child would be a close relative. Now, I think the question, I wasn't sure if I quite understood, but I think I know maybe what the question was that someone had on this one. And the question they asked was, does the close relative rule apply to a spousal equivalent of an employee? I don't think I did quite understand the question. And I don't know if that person's online with me right now, but if you are and you want to clarify what you're asking, I wasn't quite sure. I don't know if you're with us right now. You can email me later if you like and clarify, and we can kind of talk it out because I wasn't quite sure. But that's the only question. So, oh, hey, there you are. Confused about, okay, good. So you're good on it. Yeah, all right, very good. That's great. That's what we want. All right. All right. Any of these others we'd like to look at, or are y'all pretty comfortable with these? My note about these 5 where they were pretty straightforward. Okay. Very good. So that's our family relationships. These questions, or not these questions, these sections maybe were a little harder. I don't know if y'all felt the same way. So as I'm reading this and I look at the title of this section that says current employment, I don't know what the heck this section's about. So on my notes, I made this note: leaving a job to go work for a CPA firm that has your previous employer as a client. That's what we're talking about here. So once I figured out what we're talking about here, this flowed a little better. I just left that note at the top of my notes because I liked it better. So I'm working for some company. We have auditors that audit us. And now I'm leaving my company to go work for the audit firm that audited us. What do I need to consider? So I may not be a director, officer, employee, promoter, underwriter, or voting trustee. Okay. Hang on. That's where we're talking about this part of it. So let me put it there instead of here. This is something else. You may not be for an attest client. You can't be a director. You can't be an officer. You can't be an employee. You can't be a promoter. This is all really obvious things, right? Maybe less obvious. So what if you are an auditor and one of your clients is a university and they ask you to be on their adjunct faculty? You can do that. What if they ask you to be a full-time tenure track professor? You cannot. That is an oddball question that would be asked right there, though. You can be an adjunct faculty, and that could easily happen. You know, it'd be like, you know, there's a local firm that audits UNA, and I know a lot of those people, and they could very well have the expertise to come in and be an adjunct, you know, faculty member. So that would be fine. There'd be some safeguards in place, but that would be fine. And then here at the bottom is what I was talking about, that I had to make a note about to keep straight with what was going on. So you cannot leave employment with what will become a client. All right, so again, the scenario here is I'm leaving my job to go work for a CPA firm, the firm that audits us. All right, so I can't leave where I'm working and go work for who was our auditor and be on the engagement team. I can't do that. That's obvious, right? It's like, all right, I'm quitting. Now I'm going to go audit you guys that I used to work with. You'd be auditing your own work and reading the rest of this. You can't do that if the engagement covers any period of time when you were employed by the audit client. That's really obvious, right? Yeah. I don't think anyone would struggle to answer a question like that. But you can become an employee of that audit firm if you dissociate yourself from the client. So that's a good question. And so I had the same idea when I was reading this. I'm like, what do they mean? And I think I was trying to put too deep of meaning to that, because I found an audit interpretation of it, and it just said you're not doing anything anymore with them. You don't have any more duties. You're completely done with them. There is, seems like there was a question that. So here's an example of not being dissociated with the firm. So if we're an accountant for ABC Company and left to become a tax professional for whoever was auditing us, but at that new role we were still doing tax work for ABC. We're not disassociated or dissociated with ABC at that point. We're still doing some stuff. So that's essentially it. It's just cut it off. You're no longer in a relationship with them doing anything. That's essentially what it would be. But yeah, I had the same question. I was trying to put this deep meaning of, okay, what are my step-by-steps for dissociating with the client? It's basically just go and don't do anything with them anymore. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, yeah, and that would be a common thing. So yeah, you just have to cut off doing stuff. Yeah, I had the same thought. I like to have better explanations than just dissociate. And like I said, I did find an interpretation in the standards of it, but it was just obvious stuff. It's like, don't do this. I'm like, okay, yeah. I was just looking for something more concrete. I don't know what I was looking for. It's like, you have to write a letter and publish it, and then I am intending hereby dissociating, no. None of that. Okay, so while we're on the questions here, let's look at number 3 that we're looking at right now. In which of the following situations is there not an independence problem? So in A, we are Barry. We got Barry, Berry, Beery, and Burry is our A, B, C, and D characters. So in A, we are Barry. We are an accountant. We were an accountant for ABC, but we left to join the auditor that was auditing ABC as a team member for the ABC audit. But we disassociated ourselves from ABC. Does it matter? No. We can't leave a job at ABC and immediately be on the audit team auditing ABC that we had been working at. We'd be auditing our own work. And I will argue that we are not disassociated with ABC if we're on the audit team. I don't know. What I read in the interpretations, that was one of the things that said you're not disassociated if you're doing this. B says Barry is an accountant. So we are an accountant for ABC, but left to join the audit firm. And we're in a position to influence that audit. Same as A, right? We can't be on the team or in a position to influence. We got to be cut off from all of that. So no go on B. C is we're an accountant, but left to become a tax partner at the audit firm, and we're disassociated with ABC. We're cool there, right? We're working for the firm that used to audit us. But we're doing tax stuff and nothing to do with ABC itself. D, on the other hand, is we leave ABC to do tax work, and we're doing tax work for ABC at the same time. That's not something we're allowed to do. So we are not disassociated with the client at that point. That's not good. So C is the answer. The others I thought were extremely straightforward, just kind of rehashing the stuff that was specifically mentioned in the chapter. Questions or comments on this section? Okay, breezing right through this. We don't have a lot left, do we? Yeah, we do. It won't take that long. So this section is where you are leaving the audit firm to work for what was an audit client. That happens a lot in real life. So here's the rules. If you are, all right, so you were at the firm, now you're working for a client. If you are an attest team member or a person of influence, same deal, you cannot even consider future employment with a client unless you report this to the firm, say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Then you got to get off the engagement until you either reject the position or the position is no longer available. That's the rule. And there's what I thought was kind of a cool question in here. maybe that was in a different section. I'm not seeing it. Oh, wrong section. No wonder I'm not seeing it. Okay. Yeah, it's number 1. Tori is on ABC's audit team for Zibble. So we're Tori. So last week we overheard the CFO of our audit client offering a job to the partner that's in charge of the audit team on this. So far, that partner has not mentioned the offer to anyone. But we did overhear that she's considering the offer. What should we do? And this isn't really a question of knowing what we should do, but being able to say, well, we don't need to do this. We obviously aren't going to resign from the deal, right? We just overheard somebody doing this. It's not up to us to convince Lucinda to resign. It's not up to us to remove her from the audit team. So what we would do here is alert ABC. That would be our responsibility there. Do you need to know that? No, but this is just a good example of reasoning your way through a question, just using your knowledge of things, right? So none of these others really make sense. Nobody needs to resign. We don't need to do any of these things. Now, the rule that Lucinda needs to follow is she has to report this to the firm. And then she has to step off the engagement team until she either says, I'm rejecting this offer, or until that offer is no longer there. Or I guess if she takes the offer, she'll be off the team too, right? So that's the rule there. The chat box that has a question mark. It may have been an accident. If you need to elaborate on that, let me know. I missed when that came in, so I'm not sure what it is referring to. Moving back to the notes, if you go to work for an audit client, you cannot be in a position to influence the accounting firm's operations, and you cannot appear to participate in the accounting firm's business. And these audit procedures that were in place might need to be modified to deal with the fact that a previous audit team member is now working for the client. So, a few odds and ends there. And then Sarbanes-Oxley, which we'll talk about in more detail later on and on other days, deals with public companies, and there's stricter rules for public companies. Specifically, if someone leaves the audit team to work for a client, they require a 1-year, what they call a cooling off period. Not before they can go to work for the client, but before they can work in a financial oversight position. They got to hold off for a year at least before they can hit one of the big CFO, CEO type jobs, oversight jobs, that kind of thing. Question about the last question we looked at for the dissociation, wondering if the 15-hour comment determined whether the last question was true or not. Let me bounce back to that one. There it is now. Let's see. So we're talking about number 3 from that section, and we're talking about whether the 15-hour comment determined whether the last question, is that the dissociation one? Yeah, that's the question we're referring to. So what makes C correct rather than D is that in C,
we're completely disassociated from ABC. We're not doing anything for them. Now, the 15 hours, the 15 part of this is neither here nor there. It's the fact that we're doing any work for this company that we need to be disassociated with is what makes this one not right. So it's not necessarily, 15 hours. It is any hours. So, yeah, if we leave and go work at the firm that used to audit us, we can do that. But we need to stop doing stuff for the company we're leaving, basically. Does that answer your question? Is that what you're asking? Okay, good. Very good. Okay, this is where we are now. Yes. So, alert ABC is what we're going to do. But we were back on the notes, weren't we? Oh, talking about sorry. So we finished talking about the notes. So back to the problems. Look at number 2. Simi was on ABC accounting firm's audit team for the client Bill Dilly Corporation. Our client offered us a responsible job in the CFO's office, and we accepted. Which of the following conditions is not one that has to be met to ensure independence is not impaired? It's straightforward, but it's one of those that just gives you a scenario for the little items that were listed on the notes. So we're on an audit team. We accept a job for an audit client. We don't have to wait an entire audit cycle before going to work. All right, that's not something that's required of us. All we need to, now if this was a public company, which it's not, if this was a public company and we were taking a bigger position than this, we would have to wait a year, financial oversight position. But no, this is not a Sarbanes-Oxley deal. There's no publicly traded companies here. They made sure and said it's a small, privately held company. So we don't have to meet this condition. We do have to meet these other conditions. So it's always worth, well, all right, I know this is the one we don't have to worry about. Let me make sure I understand these other 3 that we do need to worry about. So I don't need to even appear to participate in that firm's business. I don't need to retain any influence over that firm's operations or financial policies. And that firm needs to consider modifying their audit procedures to adjust for this crazy risk that I've created for them. So those are the things that do need to happen. Speaking of public companies, number 5 says an issuer. That's a term you'll see a lot. So that means public company, an issuer, someone who has their shares on the stock exchanges. So an issuer equals a public company. An issuer may hire an employee of a registered public accounting firm who served on the audit engagement team within the previous year for which of the following positions? So the rule we saw on the other page was they need a 1-year cooling off period to take a financial oversight role. This is not a financial oversight role, so they can jump right in on that. The CFO, CEO, EO, controller, they have to hold off a year before taking one of those big roles like that. Staff account's fine, no financial oversight. So there you go. There's one that just asked about how long the cooling off period is. Okay. We're good. Unless there's some others we want to look at. Moving along. Okay, these next sections are super quick and easy. A few odds and ends is all they have here. I think we already talked about both of these last week. Gifts and entertainment, you cannot accept a gift from a client unless it's clearly insignificant to you. That is a judgment call. If there's a test question about that, it'll be very clear what is and is not significant. Entertainment can be accepted as long as it is reasonable. And again, that's a judgment call, but there's the rules. Litigation, we kind of touched on this idea last time, I think. Litigation between you and a client would obviously be an impaired independence situation, but maybe not as obvious is it's okay if it's just a little minor dispute not related to the engagement. I don't know why they say that. I still think it would be an issue. You know, if you're in a lawsuit with them about anything, it seems like a problem to me. So that's one that logic really, in my head anyway, wouldn't have gotten me to the right answer. Litigation is a problem. You know, that's a strained relationship. I don't feel like independence is going to be as sound as it could have been. I don't know. That's just me. There you go. Just a couple of little things. Let's see. This number one here, I think someone online or on their Excel spreadsheet wanted to look at this one. You know, this section is called Other Associations and Relationships, and I didn't take notes about much, but this one is talking about joining a bank's board of directors. So we're Bingham here. So Bingham, we have been asked to join a board of directors. That's a big deal, being on a board of directors. You're making big decisions. In which of the following scenarios would such a position be acceptable for us? All right, so when are we able to be on a bank's board of directors? A says, one of my clients has several business loans outstanding with the bank. B says, several of my clients have savings accounts at the bank. C says, one of my clients who is struggling financially is in the loan application process at the bank. And D says, several of my clients are in negotiations with this bank for operating loans. This is a tough question, kind of, but it's a little bit of strategy to easily answer a question like this. You don't have to know that the other three are definitely fine. To answer this, really all you have to know is, well, that's definitely okay. You know, we've mentioned time and time again, relationships with a bank, ordinary course of business, you know, little things like this, not as big a deal, right? You know, it's just some of my clients have a savings account at the bank. All right, it's not going to cause a problem, right? But what if one of my clients has a bunch of big old business loans with the bank that I'm on the board for? You got a little problem here, right? Or I'm on the board and one of my clients is trying to get a loan, then I'm be like, hey, bank, give my buddy who's one of my clients a loan. You know, that creates problems, right? And then in D, there's a negotiation process going on. My clients are negotiating with the bank. I'm auditing these people. They're negotiating with the bank that I have oversight on. It's just a problem, right? But just a simple, ordinary savings account, nobody's going to have a problem with that. It's a goofy question, but it just takes a little strategy to answer through. I thought the others were either too long to read or very straightforward. Any others y'all want to look at, let me know. Okay. Okay, moving along. The next section. Non-audit services. So just a few things to take note here. Sarbanes is at the bottom here. We'll hit it harder later, so you'll get sick of hearing about Sarbanes eventually. But the non-attest services, so the information I kind of took down, you know, you may do the following for an attest client. It's easier to see what you can do than make a list of what you can't do, because there's not a whole lot else you can do when you have an audit client. You got to audit them and stay out of the rest of things. But here's some things you can do if you have an audit client. You can do this for them. Advice. You can provide them with materials, research materials, things like that. Recommendations. You can go to board meetings as a non-voting advisor. You can interpret things, financial statements, forecasts, other analyses. There's more advice there on the next bullet point. And then this second to last bullet point says, and this is one where logic, again, kind of is like, I wouldn't have thought they could do that. But as long as they will not have a material effect on the entity's financial statements and the service is not subjective. So we need immaterial and objective stuff here. So it's, pretty narrow what you can do. So as long as it's not super material and as long as you can objectively do it and it's not a subjective thing, you can do appraisals, valuations, or actuarial services. So that's a little, you wouldn't think that type of thing would be allowed, in my opinion. But there it is. And this last one here, you can implement a computer software package, but you cannot design the system. So those are what I thought were the important tidbits from here. And then I kind of put in a nutshell, you essentially can't assume any management responsibilities. Now, on our questions, someone mentioned about I had a note about, oh, that's in, that question comes later. So hold that thought about what we just said about this. You can do appraisal, valuation, and actuarial services as long as they don't have a material effect on financial statements and as long as it's not a subjective thing you're doing. So hold that thought. Well, don't hold it. Let's just go forward to the question in the later section. Go back to where we were. It's number 2. And this is not in the section we're looking at. It's in a later section. But it says the Bendix accounting firm in number 2 here audited Rochester Corporation. Which of the following, this is kind of a crap question because we don't know enough about these things to make the call on this. I mean, we just don't. I don't like this question, but we'll walk through it to see what they're getting at. And do keep in mind, Wiley authors are writing a bunch of these questions while others are old CPA questions. I feel like this is a Wiley author writing this. But it says, which of the following actuarial or appraisal services would impair independence? All right, so if I happen to be unlucky enough to stumble on that question on the CPA exam, my mind is now thinking, okay, I'm looking for something that's going to be material to the financial statements and or subjective to calculate. Now, the problem is we don't know enough to know whether one of these is one of those or not. So providing actuarial services for estate and gift taxation. So that's kind of a, I don't know. Valuing the entire stock option plan, valuing post-employment benefit liabilities, and then providing actuarial services for tax planning. So, like I said, if I'm unlucky enough to be answering this question, I'm throwing A and D out immediately. But heck, I don't know B or C. Which of these is the right answer? I mean, I know what they say is the right answer. They said B is. And their reasoning is this is the one that's most subjective and material. And I guess we can draw on our intermediate accounting 2 knowledge about stock options, and there's stock options aren't always worth anything. So it's a crap question. That's kind of the bottom line on this. So I wouldn't worry about a question like this at all, because it just isn't a good one. But that's what they're driving at here. They're saying that would be the material thing here, and that would be a most subjective one. I think they're really hitting on the idea of it being subjective. There's these option pricing models that you plug inputs into, and a lot to it. I think it's beyond the scope of the CPA exam, the audit section of the CPA exam. I don't think it's a good question. So there you go. Back to our notes. And then we have the little tidbit about Sarbanes. So Sarbanes-Oxley, and this is just kind of as a preview, things you already know, applies if your client is a publicly traded company. So Sarbanes-Oxley has some guidance for you if you're auditing a publicly traded company. Right now, really the takeaway is audit committees are a huge part of Sarbanes-Oxley. The audit committees play a very important role in the Sarbanes rules, but it doesn't matter right now. We're going to hit it hard later. So just kind of giving us a little preview on this one. I didn't see any of the questions that I particularly cared to look at, unless y'all did. Okay. Okay, non-audit services, specific services. My note on this was if you can reason through some of these multiple choice questions in the section, you should be fine. There's really not anything to memorize here. You're really wanting to kind of practice and develop an ability to reason through whatever scenario they kind of throw at you. Find things that are acceptable, find things that are not acceptable. The more questions you can work, the better you'll get at that. But in a nutshell, like we've mentioned time and time again, you basically cannot assume management responsibilities. Otherwise, you're, for the most part, fine on these. And 2 more things that we've already mentioned, but I've added them here again. You can implement a computer system, but you may not design it. And then there's that appraisal thing again. Except this time I worded it as you cannot do it if they're material and subjective. There you go. Okay, here we go. So some of these are kind of interesting. Again, use these as ways to learn things, not to get bent out of shape of, oh man, how will I ever know this kind of thing? You probably wouldn't be asked a question like some of these, but use them to learn new material. One says the Harvey CPA firm prepared all tax returns for an attest client. So we have an audit client and we're doing their tax returns. Which of the following activities by us would impair independence? A says if that company requests us to deliver a copy of their tax returns to some other company. That doesn't seem like a problem, does it? It's like, hey, can you hand that off? Yeah, that's fine, right? B says we keep copies of the expense records they used or that we use to prepare their returns. We have copies of some of their stuff that we use to prepare the tax return. That's normal stuff, right? We're good there. Keeping copies of records is fine. C says we retain for our own records a copy of their final tax return that we prepared. That's normal stuff, right? Now D, again, use this to learn new information. D says because we have been their tax accountant for years and expect to be so in the future, we have retained many of the original underlying financial business, and legal documents on Carrie's behalf. Now, if you don't know the rule here, you can still reason through this and say, D's the heaviest one here. Obviously, D's the wrong thing for us to do. So that's the answer of the one that would cause us trouble. And that's really our goal, is to answer these questions. But what's going on here is you're not allowed to have custody of an attest client's original copies. You know, you kind of get into this what's called hosting services, where you're maintaining internal controls over their stuff. You know, you've got their stuff. And kind of a good rule of thumb on this, and I believe I pulled this out of that plain English text because I wanted more information about it, but they basically said if the client cuts off their relationship with you, but they have to come get things like this from you, then it's kind of a problem. That's basically their rule of thumb. You don't need their original legal documents, their original underlying documents and things like that. That's a fairly new rule from kind of the middle of 2019, I think it said. That's when that kind of came into play. We don't have to know that specific thing to be able to answer this question, I don't feel like, because we can rule out the other three. So there you go. And then number 3 says we are auditing Ricardo Corporation. Which of the following services that we provide to Ricardo would impair our independence? Which of these can we not do? A says we posted some transactions that the client coded. We posted it to their ledger. Seems fine, doesn't it? We're not making decisions. We're just being mess in that they said was what we needed to do. B says we processed their payroll using records they provided. That's fine. We're just doing things like that. C says we co-signed some checks. All right, now we're getting into heavier stuff, right? We're putting ourselves out there. We're putting ourselves in a role that we're not supposed to be in. We're authorizing things. We can't do that because, you know, one of our audit tests, as you'll see, is proper authorization of things. So we would be testing the fact that we authorize something. You're running into trouble, right? And then D says we propose some correcting journal entries. It's ordinary stuff that we would do. We're auditing and we catch some things and we're like, this was wrong. You might want to do a correcting entry to make that right. This one's a problem. Number 4, the Walton accounting firm, that's us, audited Bigsby. Which of the following information system services that we might provide would impair independence? So if you think back to what we know, we are not allowed to design a computer system. That may not be the answer here. It's not, but that's what my mind would immediately go to, and that's what I'd be looking for. But it says in A that we assisted setting up a financial statement format. No problem, right? That's standard things. We're helping. We performed network maintenance for Bigsby, so we're just kind of maintaining some stuff. We're not designing. I'd be a little tempted to scratch my head on that one for a minute, though. If I didn't find anything better, I guess I would have answered that one. C says we designed, developed, installed, and integrated the part of Bigsby's information system that was unrelated to Bigsby's financial statements. Now, I'm going to be honest. If I'm answering this question, I'm probably choosing C, and I'm wrong. But that seems heavy to me. But the answer actually is D. D says we are supervising personnel on daily operations. What we got here? I mean, this is all theoretical do's and don'ts, you know. No, I mean, you know, there's probably somewhere along the way where stuff like this has happened. But no, this isn't regular everyday stuff that would happen. But yeah, with number 4 here, I would have missed that one just because I'm seeing that word designed and developing and installed and doing all this stuff. It's a really tricky answer choice because they throw in the fact that it has nothing to do with their financial statements that I'm auditing. But that's a tricky question. But D is it because we're supervising things, and that's not good. So yeah, that's a good question because that's the thing that popped into my head. So the question says, so they can design if it's not related to financials, and if the person who wrote this question is right, then evidently yes. I haven't dug around in the code to find where they authorize and allow us to do that, but I'm hoping whoever wrote this test question did their research to know that was okay. Now, having said all this, this is not walking around, take knowledge with you. This is kind of out there stuff, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. The idea is to hopefully be able to reason through these. But like I said, I probably would have missed this one. I probably would have landed on C, and I would have been pretty confident I was right. Just because it seems so heavy. But yeah, in D, you're actually taking over management responsibility. And yeah, looking at it after seeing the answers, I'm really comfortable with D, but I don't know, it's just tricky because they make C sound so heavy, and it's almost like they're really downplaying what's going on with D. But if you really think hard about it, yeah, D is a problem because you are, like you said, taking over management supervisory responsibilities where you're directing them to do things that you're later going to audit, right? So I guess the deal with C is you did all this for them that has nothing to do with things you're going to audit. Can't imagine what that would be. But there it is. Questions like that can be frustrating if you let them frustrate you, but they can be kind of fun if you kind of do what we're doing and talk it out and understand nobody on the planet's going to get everything right on these exams, CPA exams and things. There are things we'll miss. So, there you go. But I feel like I know more after doing this question than I did before it. So that's the whole point, right? Okay, let's keep moving. All right. Members in business. So everything we've done up until now has been members in public practice, and everything we're going to talk about this semester has to do with being in public practice. So this is just kind of a quick one-off from that. Members in business. So we're talking mostly everything in this section is repeating things we've already seen, but a member in business is going to be staff accountants, internal auditors, other accountants not engaged in the public practice thing here. There's not a lot to worry with here, honestly. They don't give us a whole lot of good information. The questions were all very easy, and I don't feel like they really gave us much new stuff here. Easy stuff like, which of the following is not a member in business? So, obviously the things we've been talking about every day, every minute of this class until now, right? When they talk about discreditable acts, this is just kind of there's a bunch of other questions dealing with things you've already dealt with in other sections, just framing it in terms of a member in business. Nothing new here. And then there's other members. So you got members in public practice, members in business, other members. So other members are unemployed people, retired, people not working. Nothing we've talked about really applies to these categories of people. pretty much they need to not engage in discreditable acts. That's pretty much their responsibility because they're not doing any work. And the questions here were extremely straightforward. All right. I think we have 2 more sections and we're done. So, wow, we've been in here an hour and 40 minutes though. Doesn't seem that long. You are like, yeah, it does. Seems like we've been here 4 hours. Went by quickly. Quick sections and then we'll go. Requirements of the SEC now. So the independence rules are very similar to the AICPA rules. I always love to see that because it's like, yay, nothing new to learn. Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. So they'll keep hitting us with Sarbanes stuff along the way. A few things I have as takeaways from this is there's not a requirement for public companies to rotate audit firms. So, you know, they don't have to go from PwC to KPMG. They don't have to do that. What they do have to do is rotate the lead and concurring audit partners every 5 years. 5 on, 5 off is what they have to do. So that's something that Sarbanes-Oxley put into place to, it's just a little safeguard to keep, you know, the audit partner who's been on there for 20 years. There's a lot of opportunity for someone in that position to get away with things. But if you're having to rotate a new one on, then there's checks and balances in place. Other partners providing more than 10 hours of attest services here must be rotated off every 7 years, 7 on, 2 off. And then there's exemptions on this for firms with fewer than 5 public company clients and fewer than 10 audit partners. Kind of be fair to the smaller companies, right? So a few more tidbits on Sarbanes. So we've talked about how important audit committees are, but that's really all we've said. We'll get the detail later. And now we're saying Sarbanes requires lead and concurring audit partners to rotate every 5 years. And then other partners every 7. A little more about the audit committee. Sarbanes kind of shifted control of the audit process to the audit committee. Not the CEO and not the CFO. So the engagement and other things have to be approved by the audit committee. And again, we'll have more and more on that as we go. And then there's that 1-year cooling off period that we've already mentioned in that other section. But yeah, we'll have more comprehensive discussion of Sarbanes later on. Repetition's never a bad thing. I didn't see any questions worth looking at from this section. They all were very straightforward. And then finally, we have the PCAOB. That is the organization that has the standard, the auditing standards for companies that audit publicly traded firms. So they're in charge of public company audits, audit firms, and they are supervised by the SEC. As far as independence, because that's really what we're talking about right now, the PCAOB adopted the AICPA stuff that we've been looking at for the most part. So that's always good. They threw a few stricter requirements that I listed here. PCAOB says auditors of publicly traded companies cannot provide any service for a contingent fee, to an audit client. So when we were talking contingent fees last time, we were talking about they can do it in this situation, you know, this deal with taxes, and yeah, no, not any contingent fees under any circumstances if it's an audit client publicly traded. Cannot provide tax services in favor of confidential transactions or aggressive tax position. I don't know how important that one is. Can't provide any tax service to a person in the financial reporting oversight role at the audit client or to immediate family member, and there's some exceptions to that. Certain tax consulting services are allowed as long as they're pre-approved by the audit committee. So the audit committee plays a really important role. But yeah, I love these sections where it's like, hey, they've done pretty much what the AICPA has done. So I'm like, good, I already know that. Moving along. But yeah, they do get a little more strict on a few things. PCAOB does. Yeah, right now we're talking independence though, and that's about it. So we'll revisit Sarbanes and PCAOB stuff as we go along on things. A lot of these sections wrap up with PCAOB stuff and that kind of thing. So we'll see more and more of that. But that ends our section of content for the night. What do we got next week? Week 3. Okay, so you'll start out with that's quick and easy. Even though it's 7.5 pages of content, there's not a whole lot of good meat to it about, these sections we just did were the requirements regarding independence of the SEC and the PCAOB. So next is requirements regarding independence for Government Accountability Office and Department of Labor. You'll see much of the same stuff again. So that goes pretty quick. Then you got a task-based simulation and another quiz to do. And then we get into audits, which is where it starts to get a little more fun. So we'll be looking at what is accounting versus auditing, what are the generally accepted auditing standards and principles, quality control standards, and then we'll get an overview of the audit process. We'll talk about different types of engagements, and then we'll wrap that up with PCAOB. Like I said, they'll often throw that in at the end of things. And then from there, we'll start chipping away at different components of the audit, beginning with planning. So we'll get into internal control, then we'll do auditing procedures and evidence and sampling, and follows a pretty logical order. So that's where we're at. So week 3 looks to be pretty quick and easy. So that's good. I spaced this out just strictly according to page number. So I've got 2 days for this first section, which probably won't take 10 minutes to breeze through, if even that. So get a good chance to get ahead. Questions for me, comments for me, everything looking good? Best way to prepare in here? Prepare in here like you're preparing for the CPA exam. It won't be as hard as the CPA exam, but everybody has their own study methods, but I like to type out the notes like I have here. That if I was studying for this class, that's what my study material would look like right here. And I will never look at the book again. I hopefully have everything I possibly need to know on this Word document for myself. So I'll make sure I know all of that. I'll make sure I know it backward and forward. That's the way I study anyway. I will be working through every one of my questions that are available to me, letting myself miss them. And if I do, I'll make sure I understand why I missed it. I'll make notes about that and caution myself not to make that mistake again. That's pretty much what I do. I'm sure other people have different ways of studying, but it's just the idea of staying organized, developing skills, not of memorizing, but of reasoning through why something is the answer and why the others aren't, and just kind of developing the ability to tackle those questions. So the more of those you can practice, the better. I read a question and then I start thinking about it before I read the answer choices. That way I kind of know what I'm looking for. So I kind of guide myself through the answer instead of letting the answers guide me through. That's kind of what I do anyway. But you know how to take a test. I pick the questions that go on there. I don't put things on there that we don't talk about. I don't like that. You know, I've had teachers in the past, it's like, if it's in the book or the footnotes of the text, it's fair game. I don't do that. You know, it's like I like to make sure and highlight this is important. You know, and I don't like. Yeah, every question that you would get, I would have handpicked and made sure it's good, and that's what'll be on there, and it'll be things that we've emphasized. Yeah, or things that you can reason through based on what we've emphasized. Yeah, sometimes I'll be like, well, they should know how to do this one, even though we didn't maybe specifically do this. I'll put that kind of thing on there. But, you know, stay on top of it every day. Revisit your notes as often as possible. You know, everybody think about the past week and what you could have done differently to have been farther ahead now than you are right now. I often will do that. I'll be like, you know, I could have probably devoted a little more time this week. I could have left a book on my kitchen table and tried to do a page every couple of hours or something like that. Just force myself to do it. You know, look for ways to improve each week and develop a good system of studying and that kind of thing. Other questions? Okay. Well, I guess we're cutting out a little early. That's okay. That's typically the way this will go. I mean, there's no giant number crunching problems to go through. That's usually what kills all your time in most classes. So it's all concepts in here. All right. Well, that's all I got if that's all y'all got. See y'all next week.